Python 0 to Hero by Geekera.
Hello everyone. So now that we are clear with how exactly Python interacts with our computer and how we can interact with the Python virtual machine and how we can write the Python source code and run it. So we discussed two ways of writing the Python source code. One was shell using directly the Python command, and the other way was writing a Python script, saving it as a .py file and then running it. And then we found this one amazing way, which is using the Jupyter notebooks, which is nothing but an interactive shell, but it comes up with a very interactive UI, and it is really easy to work with. So now let's just quickly start with Python. And the first program that anyone writes while learning a new programming language is the Hello World program. So let's start with the Hello World program in Python. So to write anything to the standard output, or to write anything into the terminal's output, or to write anything to the as the output of this computer, we use the print command. So how does print function work in Python is we just say print, and in the parenthesis we give it the arguments, and in our case the argument will be hello world. And these two double quotes tell Python that this is a string, this is a combination of some characters. And to execute this, we use shift enter, and as we can see, Python executed this piece of code, and we have hello world as our output. So a rule of thumb, any programming language is incomplete without comments, and writing comments is really very important, and it is a very crucial part of writing a good source code. We write comments so that we can exactly explain to the fellow developers or to anyone who will be reading our source code. The comments tell the exact purpose of this particular piece of code. So as we know, the code, any Python code or C++ code follows very strict patterns, and which are not which are related to English language, which uses English language words, but is not exactly using the English construct. So to explain the logic that we are doing, what we do is we explain our logic as a comment, tell exactly what we are doing in the source code, and following the comment we write our source code. So it is a very good practice that we write comments explaining what this particular piece of code will be doing, and then actually writing that source code. So obviously, to write comments, we should know how to write comments in Python. So in Python, any line which starts with a hash is treated as a comment. So if I write hash, I write anything in front of it, my Python's interpreter will totally ignore this line. This line will not do. So this is what the comment should do. The comment is for the fellow developers and not for the interpreter or the machine. So the interpreter should ignore the comments. But if I give it an actual piece of code, it will do the rest of the things. Now, according to some resources, or you'll commonly find this pattern in many open source projects, you might see that many of the open source projects or tutorials will dictate that this is a multi-line comment in Python. So with what the developers while learning Python online encounter is that using triple single quotes, we can write multi-line comments in Python. If we do it, and this works as expected. So Python just simply ignored these lines and it just jumped over to print hello world and it printed it. But this is not exactly true. So the very formal definition of comment is, the comment is any piece of code, any code snippet which is totally ignored by the interpreter and exists for the ease of development. And if I ran this segment, what I see is that Python tried to parse this or try to understand this code segment. And this is not what we expect out of comments. So no, triple single quotes are not the comments in Python. These are in turn the strings in Python, or to be more precise, multi-line strings. So this is what these triple single quotes are, and we should take a very good care of it because it is very common pattern to use the strings as comments, and there is a reason for that which we'll talk about. So now let's talk about some literal constants in Python. So Python has two types of constants, and one is numbers and others are the strings. So let's talk about how numbers are used in Python. Okay, so to store an integer, we just simply say that integer like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it will treat that as a number. So these are the literal constants in Python. The second literal constant that we have are floats, and to represent a floating point number in Python, we use the dot. So the dot represents the float decimal, and when I now try to print 1.5. So if I try to check the type of a, so there is a function in Python which tells us the type of the variable. It comes out to be int, and if I store a floating point number in it, type of the variable comes out to be float. So these are the two numbers that Python supports, and surprisingly there is another type numbers that Python supports which are complex numbers. This is a very uncommon pattern in programming languages to support a complex number. So let's see how a complex number can be written in Python. So to write the complex part of the number, which is the imaginary part of the number, what we do is we append j in front of the constant number. So now this j represents the imaginary part, and what we can do is we can write 1 plus. So this becomes the real part and this becomes the imaginary part. Try to print it, it will be 1 plus 5j. And if I try to print the type of a, what I'll see is that it is a complex number. So these are the three number literal constants that Python supports. Now let's talk about another literal constant that it has. It has strings, and let's see how we can interact with strings in Python. So to write a string in Python, what we can do is we can simply use double quotes and write anything inside it. And if I try to print this, it will print the string again, and the type of it remains the str. So unlike other programming languages like C++ and Java, Python doesn't have char data type. So other programming languages, what they do is they to store a string, they use character arrays, or they use the sequence of characters. But in the case of Python, everything so every character is a string. Even if I write a single character like this, even this is again a string. So Python doesn't have the character data type. So as I said, if I try to do this, even then it will be a string. So there are four ways in which we can write strings in Python, and either we can use double quotes or single quotes. So these are the two ways in which we write single line strings in Python. To write multi-line strings, what we can do is we can use triple single quotes. We can have multiple lines of strings, and this is what we saw when we were talking about the comments. So this is one of the way in which we write strings in Python, and the other way is using triple double quotes. So this also represents a string in Python. So let's just see how this works. So as I said, I can have this. This is a valid string. I can have single quotes. Will be a valid string as well. I can have triple single quotes. This is also valid. And in the end, you can have triple single quotes. This is, as we saw, obviously because these were multi-line strings, and starting we have a new line character, then again new line, then again new line. It also started with a new line character. So this is what blanks that we are. So this is how we write strings and literal constants like integer, floats, and complex in Python. So as we know, as we just saw, we need a variable, or we need certain thing in which we can store these constant values, in which we can store numbers, strings, or anything. So these are the variables in Python. And to name anything in Python, we can name variables, function, or to name anything, we need identifier rule. So there is only a single identifier rule in Python, and it says any identifier name is valid if it starts with an underscore, lowercase case alphabets, and uppercase alphabet. So any identifier name is valid if it starts with underscore, lowercase alphabets, and uppercase alphabet. Plus, what it says is the rest of the name, the rest of the identifier name can also contain digits as well. So the identifier name cannot start with a digit, but the rest of the name of the identifier can contain digits. So let's see what are some valid identifier name. So as we know, ABC would be a valid identifier name. Underscore ABC would be a valid identifier name. Underscore would be a valid identifier name, but one ABC is not a valid identifier. And not even a dollar, not even percentage, nothing. Only the uppercase or lowercase alphabets, or the underscore should be the first character of the identifier. This is a very basic identifier naming in Python. So some valid identifiers are this, and this. And some invalid identifiers are will give me an error, and even this will give me an error. So these are not valid identifier names. So this is it for this video, guys. In the next video, we'll be starting off with